All right, welcome to CRT This Week. This is September 25th, 2021. Just wanted to go over a few examples of how CRT is permeating society. A lot of people say that are supportive of CRT or want to put their head in the sands a little bit, that it doesn't really exist and that no one can define it and they can't really see this being a big deal other than, maybe they want to change a little bit of history or call out a little bit of U.S. history or use data from critical race theory or intersectionality to show how certain groups are not treated as well. That is not anything more than a very small part of what critical race theory is. So I'm going to try on a weekly basis here to just show you how some of these things are manifesting. And they're manifesting everywhere. It's every part of society. Starting off, we go to ASU, local college here. You've got a couple of young white students, male, that are sitting in the library that are confronted by a couple of women because of a sticker that he has on his laptop. Here's what happens.
You are racist. Your sticker is racist because police, that's a job. You can choose to be a police. I don't choose to be black. Okay? No, you can choose to be a cop. You can choose to kill people with a badge, and you're protecting that shit, which means that you're racist.
Okay. So what's happening here, right? What is the indoctrination here? A couple of things that are made on assumptions to begin with. Number one, we go to the police as if policing is racist. Can there be issues of racism in policing? Of course there can. There can be in anything. But to automatically go out and say that because someone has a police sticker saying that they are racist is a little bit ridiculous. What is she calling on? She's calling on what the organization Black Lives Matter was actually built on, which was a lie, which was that there were a lot of young black men, especially, that were being killed by police officers. And as we moved more and more into the 2010s and we had cameras, everybody had cameras available to them on their smartphones, we saw some horrific scenes. But this blew everything out of proportion. In 2015, the Washington Post started tracking all of these numbers. And here's what they found. Now, 2015 was a worse year than most, but they found that after 2015, which was an anomaly, that actually the stats started to drop. Out of 10 million arrests in the United States, 10 million, that doesn't count other confrontations or interactions with police officers, 10 million arrests in the United States, an average of about 20 unarmed black individuals were killed by policemen. Most of these, almost all of them, were because of aggressive behavior where the black male was going after the police officer, and they were trying to attack him. Some of them trying to grab their guns, etc. And so you think about those numbers, and this whole movement of Black Lives Matter was built off of that. And of course, that's different from the people just marching in the street, although that's what seems to launch all these things, like with George Floyd, right? Is the policing. The hashtag Black Lives Matter comes from the organization Black Lives Matter. But here at Arizona State University, you've got two young white males that are being called out from those that are indoctrinated, saying that they are not neutral. In other words, you can't have any expression about yourself whatsoever. You can have expression if you're a person of color, but if you're white, you cannot have any expression about yourself. And that's what she's calling out here. So she's saying that the police are racist. You can choose whether or not to be a policeman. So if you choose to be a policeman, you are racist. That's how ridiculous this is. In 2019, only 9 black individuals were killed. Unarmed black individuals were killed by police out of all of these arrests. The numbers are dropping. Facts matter. I remember speaking with a family member, a close family member on this, who could not believe that what I was saying was true until I brought her to the Washington Post database that no, they're being killed all over the place. Police are killing black men everywhere. That is not true. Facts matter. Now, this took place in a library at Arizona State University. Let's go to the University of Washington and talk about their librarian program. They are now beginning to teach, of course, critical librarianship. Critical librarianship acknowledges that libraries and archives are impacted by society and culture. This is all indoctrination, societal indoctrination, and aims to make our professional practice, it says, more transparent and accountable to change. First point, understanding libraries and archives are not neutral. In other words, they would act out, they are violent to certain individuals. Understanding there is no universal librarian or library user. Okay, yeah, everybody's different. That's usually why there's a lot of different books. Acknowledges historic biases in promoting certain ways of knowing over others. That has nothing to do with a library. That has to do with history and publication. And that is true, right? But to go in and say they're now going to be what? The gatekeepers and those that recommend the books to individuals based on someone's color when they come in? Very, very odd. Point 4, questioning how power, right? This is where it all comes from. Questioning how power, privilege, and oppression impact our work. Critical librarianship. You think that that's not what this is about? Take a look at their website. Words matter. Critical cataloging and archival description at the University of Washington libraries. And this is where we get, an Ibram Kendi coming in and just saying over and over again, everything is racist, everything is steeped in racism. Here's their one of the paragraphs here on their website of the critical librarians at University of Washington. It says, libraries, like other institutions, are produced in systems marked by racism. Libraries are racist. Patriarchy, also, and other forms of cultural bias. Contemporary libraries are like all Enlightenment era projects. Okay, this is key to understand. See, they're becoming more and more transparent. People don't believe me when I say that this is about liberal democracy. This is about freedom. This is about Western values. Critical race theory, intersectionality, wants to topple that. It wants to bring it down. And you see this everywhere. This is a very simple example in a library program at the University of Washington. Again, contemporary libraries are like all Enlightenment era projects. They want to reverse things out through the Enlightenment because one of the things that came through the Enlightenment was the United States of America. One of the things that comes through the Enlightenment is science. One of the things that comes through the Enlightenment is the American project and the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. They say that these are Enlightenment-era projects of dominant order and aim to collect, display, and assign a classification scheme to every piece of knowable information. No, actually, that's exactly what intersectionality is and critical race theory is. Now, when you see critical in here, it really should be capitalized. That's really what they're talking about. This is the DNA of language, and the language goes back through critical race theory. That's what they're talking about here, the same idea, going from critical race theory down through critical theory as a whole, and then going back through Marx, and then going back to Hegel, and ultimately, at least the terminology, going back to Kant. It says that critical cataloging and archival is an approach to these descriptive practices, and it means questioning the status quo and seeking alternative controlled vocabularies. This is key. These movements try to control language. And they always, and ways of organizing knowledge to be more inclusive and equitable. Not talking about equality here. Equitable is the word. Forced equity, forced results. Continuing with language, it says this also means being more transparent when we decide to retain outdated terminology. It is language. And this is what is so alarming to me when I hear, I had an interview recently with a guy I really like, Ben Pacini, and he's talking about his anti-racism. Now, what he's really doing is he's adopting language that is being used that is not going to be helpful for him or for anybody else. He can pretend it means something else. He can pretend it means it's going to be him fighting racism. That's not what it is. He's adopting something that is already pregnant with meaning and then using that word. That is what Derrida focused on. That's what Marcuse and Horkheimer and Adorno at the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory were focused on. It is, how do we break this down? How do we deconstruct the language and insert a virus into it? They literally say that. Now, I want to go over to one of the major companies in the country, and that is CVS, the pharmacy. CVS has launched a mandatory anti-racist training program for hourly employees to deconstruct their privilege. This is everywhere. Deconstruct, right, is a term that comes out of postmodernism from Jacques Derrida. And it is just another way of looking at critical, right? It's what are we going to do to break something down? It's like the Hegelian dialectic. It is, how are we going to break down the norm and move the goalposts? And for them, for postmodernism, for Jacques Derrida, how are we going to then break down language and reinsert and insert a virus into it that allows a change of thought, because thought and language work hand in hand. So Mr. Merlo, who was the CEO of CVS, he has retired since then, but he hosted a conversation with Boston University's Ibram Kendi, Mr. Anti-Racism. And in that conversation, Ibram Kendi says, then I quote, "To be born in the United States is to literally have racist ideas rain on our head consistently and constantly." See, it has to be that way. The agitation, even though things are better than they have ever been. And that's one reason I think why this is really moving in strong, why there's such a strong movement with it, because things are getting so much better. But the awareness of the small amount still of racism that is left has got to be, you have to make a mountain out of a molehill in order to get the response, in order to generate the money, in order to show the problem. It is pouring salt on a scratch. It's again, I'm not discounting that it doesn't happen. It does. But for this movement to work, and it's working very, very well, there must be an all-out cry of racism that it's the United States is steeped in it, because the idea of critical race theory is that America was founded on racism, and therefore the documents, the founders, everything to do with the West and with liberal democracy is founded on racism. They do that because it's really not the racism that they're concerned with. That they are, but it's what's underlying this is liberal democracy. That is what they are after. Kendi also said that we are walking through society completely soaked in racist ideas. That is not true. That's just not true. He included children with that as young as 2 and 3 years old also. He says in this conversation that the solution to this is to diagnose the employees as racists. That's where you start, original sin. And then you help them become anti-racist and stop hurting somebody else. Again, when you understand what anti-racism really means, what it has become, when we speak of anti-racism, you have to use the popular term and the popular meaning. It means activation. It means being an activist. It means being a hard left activist. That is anti-racism. You can pretend you're going to appropriate the word into something else, but the common language, the common understanding of what an Ibram Kendi, going all the way back to Kimberly Crenshaw, who also used the term anti-racism in the 80s. What it means is hard left-wing activism. I'm not talking about being a liberal. I'm talking about hard left-wing radical activism. Out of this came a number of training initiatives where each of the employees were to deconstruct their racial and sexual identities and then rank themselves. That's your intersectionality. Rank themselves according to their privilege. Boy, this is such a great idea. It is going to break everybody out into ites. There's just no way around this. And then lastly in this episode, I just want to go over a tease here on going further into some of the state curriculum for K to 12. Some of it's just high schools. For some of it, it's their state universities. But this here is about teaching ethnic studies in California to K to 12. This is something that now much of the curriculum here that's been put into place is already moving forward and being implemented in California as we speak. And I've had many people that comment on my episodes when I go through and talk about how this is in the schools and it's going everywhere. People don't read this. What they do is they listen to talking heads that tell them that it's not true. It is true, and it is everywhere. So a couple teases here just for California's ethnic studies program. Here we are on page 12 of 21 in this excerpt, and this is lines 255, 256, 257, and then 258 I think we've got here. It says, I quote, "The foundational values of this ethnic studies program are housed in the conceptual model of the double helix," new words here, "which interweaves holistic humanization and critical consciousness." Right? Consciousness is something that runs right through critical theory. It goes right back through Marcuse and Adorno and Horkheimer and beyond and goes back into Marx. You can see this everywhere. It's holistic humanization and critical consciousness. Humanization includes the values of love, respect, hope, sounds wonderful, and solidarity, which are based on celebration of community cultural wealth. Okay, what is this being pulled from? Our footnote is number 19. Here is our number 19 footnote right here. Of course, critical race theory is not being taught in schools, but what we've just been going over is critical race theory. By Tara Yoso, 2005 is the footnote from a book or a paper entitled "Whose Culture Has Capital? A Critical Race Theory Discussion of Community Cultural Wealth in Race, Ethnicity, and Education." Right? So that is an example right there of this is what the ethnic studies program is about. It's being drawn from critical race theory and critical consciousness. A couple more here. Line 288. Ethnic studies should address those experiences, including systemic racism. This is a critical race theory term. And then secondly, intersectionality, right? Intersectionality is a major part of critical race theory. A lot of people say it has nothing to do with it. It has everything to do with critical race theory. Remember that critical race theory was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. She also coined intersectionality in her paper in 1989 on mapping the margins. And here's what it says. They're drawing directly from intersectionality. This is critical race theory. This is line 343. Ethnic studies focuses on the role of race and ethnicity. However, these are not the sole forces affecting personal identity, group identification, and the course of human experience. People, including students, are not only members of racial and ethnic groups. They also belong to many other types of social groups. These groups may be based on such factors as sex, religion, class, ability, disability, age, sexual orientation, gender identity, citizenship status, socioeconomic status, and language use. She continues here. I want to get this in. For each individual, these multiple social categories converge in a unique way. This is all about this. This is just breaking everybody up. That confluence of identities is sometimes called intersectionality. Those myriad categories influence but do not necessarily determine one's life trajectory. And then a little further down, to some degree, each person's individuality and identity are the result of intersectionality, right? This is taking the idea of your unique experiences as part of your identity, which is all true, conflating the different identities together, right? An amalgamation of all of this, and then rising it up to the top. In other words, it is all about things that are systemic. It is about collectives. It is not about the individual. That's what this tries to push. You're part of a collective here. You're part of a collective there. Put these two together and you get kind of a Venn diagram. And in the middle, that's kind of more along the lines of your intersectionality, so to speak, as an example. It takes away the individual. That is the result. The idea that you are a human being, that value, that identity is dropped lower and lower and lower. Or if you are a believing person in religion, that you are a child of God, that we are all children of God. That identity gets minimalized, right, to something that is a massive change in an Americanism, which is we are each created equal, right? We are each created in the image of God. This is subverting that. That's what it wants to do. That is what the whole thing is about. It is pernicious, it is dangerous, and it is getting into everything, even into our libraries and indoctrinating our librarians. Thanks for listening.